to understand a truth that I wish to share with you. Life is not about avoiding the storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. In the most difficult moments, when it feels like everything is falling apart, that's when we are tested. And that's when we find our true strength. And that's when we find our true strength. Through the stories I've lived, and help you find the motivation to keep going. I wasn't born wise, and I didn't gain wisdom overnight. It came through experience, through countless mistakes, failures, and heartbreaks. But through it all, I discovered that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. And so, as I share these reflections from a life lived, I hope you will find in them the seeds of hope, the strength to rise again, and the motivation to continue your own journey. Childhood is a time when everything seems possible. The world is wide, full of wonder, and every day is an adventure. I remember those early years, running through the fields with my friends, the wind in my hair, my heart light and free. There were no worries back then, no thoughts of the future, only the present moment, alive with possibility. One of my earliest memories is of my grandfather, a stern but loving man who would sit me on his knee and tell me stories of his own childhood. His voice was deep and slow, each word carefully chosen, as if he were trying to pass down the wisdom of the ages in the form of simple dailies. He would talk about the hardships he faced, the long hours working in the fields, and the lessons he learned from nature. Life, he would say, is like the seasons. There will be times of harvest and times of drought, but in both, there is something to be learned. As a child, I didn't fully understand what he meant. To me, life was easy, carefree. I didn't know what it meant to struggle, to fail, or to face loss. But as I grew older, those words stayed with me, like seeds planted deep in the soil of my mind, waiting for the right time to sprout. There were, of course, challenges even in childhood. I wasn't always the strongest or the smartest, and there were times when I felt left behind, when others seemed to be racing ahead of me. But in those moments, I would remember my grandfather's words. Be patient, he would say. Your time will come. And so, I learned the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment, and of trusting that everything happens in its own time. Looking back now, I realize how important those early lessons were. They shaped the way I approached life, taught me the importance of resilience, and helped me to see that every challenge is an opportunity for growth. Even when life seems difficult, when it feels like nothing is going right, there is always something to be gained from the experience. Youth is a time of boundless energy and endless possibilities. You feel like the world is at your feet, waiting for you to conquer it. I remember those days vividly, my heart full of dreams, my mind bursting with plans. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I had it all others, not to me. In those early years, I threw myself into everything with enthusiasm, whether it was my studies, my work, or my relationships. I wanted to make a mark, to stand out, to achieve greatness. But what I didn't realize at the time was that life is not always linear. Ambition is important, yes, but it's also necessary to be flexible, to adapt when things don't go as planned. I can still recall the first time I faced real disappointment. I had set my heart on a particular career, spent years preparing for it, only to find out that the path I had chosen was full of obstacles I hadn't anticipated. The rejection letters came one after another, and with each one, a piece of my confidence crumbled. It was a hard pill to swallow, that realization that no matter how hard you try, sometimes things just don't work out. At first, I was angry at the world, angry at myself. I felt like a failure, but as the dust settled, I began to see that this setback was not the end of the road. It was simply a detour. That's one of the most important lessons I learned during my youth. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean you should stop planning. Sometimes, the path you thought was yours is blocked for a reason, because there's something better waiting for you around the corner. Looking back, I realize now that those early disappointments were not failures at all. They were opportunities in disguise. Each closed door led me to a new path, one that I hadn't even considered. And ultimately, those detours brought me to where I am today. So, if you find yourself disillusioned, remember this: your journey isn't over, it's just beginning. And sometimes, the greatest successes come after the greatest setbacks. Adulthood, to many, comes like a tidal wave, sudden, overwhelming, and relentless. I entered this phase of life with high hopes and the belief that I had everything figured out. I was armed with dreams and ambition, ready to take on the world. But soon, I found myself grappling with the weight of responsibilities that I hadn't anticipated. The bills, the job pressure, the relationships that needed nurturing, all of it felt like carrying a mountain on my back. At first, I thought I could handle it all. I worked long hours, chased success, and tried to keep every part of my life intact. But I quickly learned that no matter how strong or capable you think you are, there will always come a time when the weight becomes too much to bear. And for me, that time came sooner than I expected. There were days when I felt like I was drowning. The more I tried to push forward, the more it seemed like I was sinking deeper into the quicksand of life's demands. Work was stressful, relationships became strained, and the dreams that once felt so close now seemed impossibly distant. I remember staring at my reflection one evening after a particularly long day, feeling utterly defeated. How had life turned into this? How had the dreams of youth been replaced with exhaustion and survival? But in the darkest moments, we often find the clearest lessons. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I realized that I had been going about it all wrong. I had been treating life like a race, trying to outrun time, outrun responsibilities, and even outrun my own limitations. But life isn't a race, and it certainly isn't something to outrun. It's something to live, to experience, to grow through even when it's hard. I began to understand that resilience isn't about never feeling overwhelmed or never failing. It's about finding the strength to keep going even when you feel like you have nothing left to give. It's about acknowledging the struggles, facing them head on, and finding ways to adapt and persevere. Life is not about perfection, it's about progress. I started making small changes, taking things one step at a time, focusing on what I could control, and learning to let go of what I couldn't. I stopped comparing myself to others and began to appreciate the journey I was on, no matter how difficult it seemed. I stopped comparing myself to others and began to appreciate the journey I was on, no matter how difficult it seemed. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to handle the challenges that life inevitably throws your way. The responsibilities didn't go away, of course, but I became better at managing them. I learned to prioritize, to ask for help when I needed it, and to remind myself that I didn't have to have it all together all the time. There's strength in vulnerability, in admitting that you can't do it all alone. And there's also immense power in perseverance, knowing that no matter how tough things get, you have the ability to push through. Adulthood may have come with its fair share of struggles, but it also taught me the value of resilience, of digging deep when times get tough, and of trusting that even in the hardest of times, you have the strength to rise again. Middle age is often seen as the stage of life where everything comes into perspective. By this point, you've walked through many chapters, some triumphant, some painful, and you begin to see your life in a broader context. There's a sense of slowing down, not necessarily in action, but in mindset. You're no longer chasing every opportunity with youthful urgency. Instead, you start evaluating what really matters. For me, middle age brought a mix of pride, contentment, and an unavoidable sense of regret. There were many things I had achieved by the time I reached this stage: success in my career, a stable family life, and a sense of personal growth. But with these achievements came the realization of everything I hadn't done. There were roads not taken, opportunities missed, and relationships that had faded along the way. As much as I had gained, I couldn't help but wonder what might have been different if I had made other choices. When you reach this stage of life, you become keenly aware of time, not in the same way you did when you were young, thinking you had endless years ahead. Now, feels more finite, more precious. You think more about legacy, about the mark you've made, and about what you will leave behind. I found myself reflecting deeply on how I had spent my years, the people I had loved, and the things I had worked so hard for. The achievements were certainly there. I had worked my way up in my career, earned the respect of my peers, and provided well for my family. I had formed meaningful relationships, and I had learned much about the world and myself. These were things I was proud of, no doubt. But when I took a step back and looked at my life as a whole, I couldn't help but ask myself, did I spend enough time on the things that truly matter? It's a question that haunts many people at this stage of life. The grind of daily responsibilities, work, bills, maintaining a household often overshadows the more personal, profound aspects of life. It's easy to get caught up in the cycle of work and obligation, only to realize later that the moments that should have been cherished, the time spent with loved ones, the pursuit of personal passions were often put on hold, saved for later. The truth is, later never comes. There's always another task, another deadline, another responsibility, and before you know it, years have slipped through your fingers. I realized that I had often been so focused on achieving external success that I had sometimes neglected the internal, the emotional, and the spiritual. Of course, these reflections brought with them a sense of regret. I regretted the times I worked late instead of being present with my family. I regretted the relationships that had faded because I hadn't made the time to nurture them. I regretted the passions I had pushed aside, thinking I would get to them eventually, only to realize that eventually had become too late. But middle age isn't just about regret. It's also about reconciliation, making peace with the choices you've made and learning from them. As I looked back on my life, I started to understand that while I couldn't change the past, I could still shape my future. There was still time to reconnect with the people I had drifted away from. Still time to rekindle old passions, and still time to focus on what truly mattered. In fact, middle age can be a time of great empowerment. You've gained wisdom from your experiences, and you now know yourself better than ever before. You understand your strengths and your limitations, and you've come to realize that success isn't just about external accomplishments. It's about living a life that feels authentic, meaningful, and aligned with your values. So, I began to make changes. I prioritized spending time with the people I cared about. I made more time for myself, for reflection, for creativity, and for the things that brought me joy. I let go of the relentless pursuit of success and focused more on what brought me peace and fulfillment. I came to see that it's never too late to make a change, to redirect your life in a way that feels more aligned with who you truly are. Yes, there were regrets, But there was also gratitude for the lessons learned, for the moments of beauty and love that had been there all along, even if I hadn't always seen them clearly. Middle age taught me the importance of balance between work and life, between ambition and contentment, between striving and simply being. It's easy to look back on your life and see the mistakes, the missed opportunities, and the moments of failure. But it's just as important to recognize the growth, the successes, and the joy. The key, I think, is to learn from both the good and the bad, and to use those lessons to live more fully in the present. Late adulthood, often considered the twilight of life, carries with it an air of calmness and deep reflection. By this point, many of life's storms have passed, and you find yourself standing on the shores of experience, watching the waves recede, leaving behind the lessons and memories that have shaped who you are. There is a profound sense of wisdom that comes with age, a wisdom not just earned through success, but through failure, through pain, and through love. By the time I reached late adulthood, I no longer felt the need to chase after the things I once thought were essential. In fact, much of what I had once deemed important career milestones, social status, material possessions seemed so far away from the peace I had finally found. Instead, I became more focused on being present, on appreciating the beauty in the simple things like a quiet morning, the sound of laughter from my grandchildren, or the serenity of watching the sunset after a long day. There's something humbling about getting older. As your body slows down and the physical figure of youth fades, you come to terms with the limitations that aging brings. I can no longer move with the speed and energy I once had, but in its place, I found a different kind of strength, one rooted in patience, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for the time I have left. In this phase of life, acceptance becomes a central theme. Acceptance of the past and its unchangeable nature. Acceptance of the people who have come and gone. And most importantly, acceptance of oneself. For years, I had carried the weight of mistakes, of regrets, of things left unsaid. But in late adulthood, you learn to let go. You learn that life is not a collection of perfect decisions or flawless moments. It is, instead, a tapestry woven from both the beautiful and the painful, the joyful and the sorrowful. I remember one afternoon, sitting in my garden, thinking about the person I had been and the person I had become. The younger version of me was ambitious, driven, always looking for the next challenge. He was someone who believed that success was the key to happiness, that achieving goals and climbing higher was what mattered most. But as I sat there, surrounded by the stillness of nature, I realized that the person I had become was very different. I no longer chased the high of accomplishment. Instead, I value peace, connection, presence. The wisdom of old age teaches you that the greatest joys often come from the simplest moments. You come to understand that life's most meaningful experiences aren't necessarily the grand, sweeping events. Rather, they are the quiet, everyday moments, the shared cup of tea with a loved one, the gentle conversation with an old friend, the feeling of contentment that comes from simply being. In this stage, I found peace in reconciling with the inevitable, the end of life. This isn't to say that I embrace the idea of death without fear, no. There's always a degree of uncertainty when facing the unknown. But I had come to accept that death is a natural part of life, something that we all must face sooner or later. Instead of resisting or fearing it, I learned to see it as part of the journey, a transition rather than an end. One of the most fulfilling aspects of late adulthood has been the opportunity to share my experiences and wisdom with younger generations. As I grew older, I became more aware of the importance of passing down knowledge, of guiding those who are still in the midst of their own journeys. I often found myself sitting with my children and grandchildren, telling stories of my youth, of my mistakes, of my triumphs and failures. I wanted them to know that life is not a straight path, that they too will stumble, fall, and rise again. It was in these moments of storytelling, of connecting with those who will carry on after me, that I felt the most alive. It's strange to think that as we approach the end of life, we often feel a greater sense of purpose. Perhaps it's because we know that our time is limited, and we want to ensure that our lives meant something, that we have made a difference, even in small ways. Late adulthood is also a time for forgiveness of others and of oneself. I had held on to grudges for far too long, carried wounds that only festered because I refused to let them heal. But as the years passed, I learned to forgive those who had hurt me, and just as importantly, to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made. There is a lightness that comes with forgiveness, a sense of freedom that allows you to live the remainder of your days with a heart unburdened. As the days grew quieter and life slowed down even further, I found myself spending more time in reflection. I looked back on my journey with all its twists and turns and found comfort in knowing that I had lived a full life, a life with its share of challenges and heartache, but also one filled with love, joy, and countless moments of beauty. There's a profound sense of peace in knowing that you have lived your life to the best of your ability, that you have done your part, and now you can rest. Late adulthood, for me, became a time of gratitude. Gratitude for the experiences I had, for the people who had walked with me through different chapters of my life, and for the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to love. I became grateful for the small things, the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of the wind through the trees, the laughter of family gathered around the dinner table. As sit here now, looking out at the horizon, I realize that life has been a gift. Not a perfect gift, but a beautifully imperfect one. And as I approach the final chapters, I do so with a heart full of peace, knowing that I have lived well, loved deeply, and learned from every step along the way.